Well, good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson tonight. President Trump has been abroad for a week now, visiting a bunch of places, including Saudi Arabia, Israel, and Western Europe. It's been an eventful trip in a lot of ways.
Drive out the extremists. Drive them out of your holy land and drive them out of this earth.
I want to tell you also how much we appreciate the reassertion of American leadership in the Middle East.
I can relate a lot to what Barron is going through because I've been in his age in my dad's first term too, and
yeah.
you know.
And look how he turns out. The United States and Israel can declare with one voice that Iran must never be allowed to possess a nuclear weapon. Never, ever.
Well, it wasn't just ceremony either. In Riyadh, the president announced a $100 billion arms deal, which decisively aligned the U.S. with the Saudis in opposition to Iran, its Shia rival. In Israel, Trump pressured the Israeli prime minister to restart peace efforts with the Palestinians. In Brussels, he told NATO leaders that the time has come for them to pay more for their own defense rather than relying on U.S. taxpayers to protect them. Now, you can agree or disagree with any of these ideas, but they are departures from the norm and significant. They are news, in other words, and they ought to be covered by the news media. Have they been? We'll take a look at some of the top headlines from this week. From CNN, Trump compliments Egyptian president's shoes. From ABC News, Pope to First Lady, what are you feeding Trump? From NBC, Trump pushes Montenegro's prime minister at NATO summit. From the New York Daily News, why the Trump women wore veils in the Vatican but not headscarves in Saudi Arabia. From the Washington Post, this, the world gets its first real look at the Trump marriage. Plus about 1,000 stories about that weird glass ball thing that Trump touched along with the Saudi king and the Egyptian president. What have we learned? Well, reporters are virtually to a person liberal Democrats, and as a group, they hate Trump the way the devil hates holy water, violently and viscerally. That is bad, as we pointed out before. Their hysteria saps credibility from the news business and makes them look ridiculous, as in this case. They're biased. But bias may not be the worst thing about the press. The worst thing is how shallow and dumb they mostly are, especially on topics that actually matter, like foreign policy. The reason? Well, the business model for many media companies collapsed about 10 years ago. A lot of the adults took early retirement at that point or went into PR. They were replaced by 23-year-old sociology majors raised on social media and blogs. This group doesn't really know anything. Worse, they don't know what they don't know. So they stick to what they do know. Clickbait. Was that a crystal ball Trump touched in Saudi Arabia? Did he hold his wife's hand afterwards? Barf. Who cares? Tell us something that matters. But most of them can't because they're not capable of it. And that is exactly why we called Charles Krauthammer for some facts. He joins us in the studio now. So, Charles, underneath all the hand-holding stories was, I think, a bigger story. What was it?
It was a very big story, and I think it's understood around the world. And I do agree with you. I don't think it's so much anti-Trump animus, although that's big. It's mostly ignorance.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, we're coming up on the 50th anniversary of the Six-Day War. You ask any of the reporters in town, any of the people who are the major writers, and you ask them what was the cause of the war, what was the result. People talk about occupied territories. They haven't a clue what that was about. And what you see, therefore, as you point out, is emphasizing the trivialities. But this was a very significant trip, not so much for the actual events of the trip, but for the choices. He chooses to go to Saudi Arabia first. That's never been done. The reason? Because for the last 8 years, we had a policy that can only be called appeasement of Iran. Obama had this idea he was going to change. This can be a Nixon in China. He was going to be the one who would go to the Ayatollah, who would convince Iran we are not their enemy. So what was the first trip Obama did? He goes to Cairo. He says to the Muslim world, I'm new. I'm your friend. We will no longer abuse you and disrespect you. All these apologies. And he thought he'd reap the rewards. What he reaped the rewards of a naif and of a man who did not understand that Iran was unappeasable. So 8 years later, Trump says, no, we've abandoned the Sunni Arabs who are terrified by Iran, who are threatened by Iran, who are facing an existential threat from Iran, and we're going to reassure them we're on their side, we're not abandoning them, we're not going to tilt to Iran. And by showing up in Riyadh, by giving a speech to 50 Sunni nations, we basically are declaring the U.S. understands the Muslim world right now, the historic importance of what's happening in Muslim is a civil war between Shiite Iran, Persian Shiite Iran, against Arab Sunni nations. That's the war. That explains Iraq, it explains Syria, it explains Lebanon, explains what's going on in Yemen. That's the war, and this United States, having tilted towards the Shiite side, which means aligned with Russia, with Assad, with Hezbollah, with all the bad guys in the region, that's over. We're back where we've always been, on the side of the moderate Arabs, the Gulf Arabs, the Saudis, the Sunnis, and that's the importance of this trip.
So that's exactly what you would do if you were a puppet of Putin, right? Oh, wait, no, it's the opposite. But this, you wrote a piece about this I thought was really smart. You said this is one of the most important things you can do to bring Israel closer to its Arab neighbors.
That's one of the amazing side effects. The Saudis, the Gulf Arabs, the Egyptians, Jordanians, Egyptians and Jordanians already have a peace treaty with Israel. But the rest of the Arab world is stuck in this 70-year habit of hostility to Israel, and they have not been able to move. Now they understand that their enemy is not Israel, it's Iran. Israel has no intent to bring down and eradicate the Saudi regime. Iran does. Iran is an enemy of Israel, it's an enemy of the moderate Arabs, Sunni Arabs. So there is this historic opportunity, and it's happening below the radar. There is cooperation between Saudis and Israelis with intelligence, all this other stuff that we don't hear about. It's an opportunity to soften the eternal hostility between Israel and the Arab states, with the hope, I don't know that it'll be imminent, could take a generation or two, that if you do loosen up those relationships, where the Gulf Arabs, the Sunni Arabs, the moderate Arabs, the pro-American Arabs are able to have commerce, interaction, good relations with Israel, that might open up a chance for the Palestinians, who are the key in the end, to say, look, the other Arabs are accommodating with Israel, it's time that we did.
And the other Arabs might pressure them to do that.
They'd get a little, they're getting a bit tired of Palestinian rejectionism, and with Iran breathing down their throats, they know who their friends are and who their enemies are.
That's meaningful, maybe more meaningful than touching a glass ball, just my view. Charles, thanks a lot for explaining that.